Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer and editor-in-chief, Thomas Dougherty. Thank you so much for being here, Thomas.
Not a problem at all. It was so much excitement when you came to the table at SummerCon to
Mm-hmm.
talk to me, and so I was just like, okay, yeah, we're gonna have to continue this energy onto the podcast. So,
Such a good excuse to just, yap and talk about comics for an hour. It's amazing.
right? It's so the horror. Oh.
So, let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your work.
So I started Committed Comics with my friend Alex back in 1999. So yeah, the 19th century, you know. Uh,
Oh, days.
yeah, we were I had always been a fan of comic books my entire life. Alex was a fan of comic books as well. We worked
Mhm.
together at the time, and we were in the '90s. It was not a good time for comic books. You know, if you go back and you look at some of the, like, Marvel went bankrupt in the '90s. DC changed over their entire editorial line. They just had a lot of problems and a lot of issues. They killed Superman back then. um, and so me and my friends and Alex were complaining about the comic book industry as comic book fans do, right? We always complain and
Yeah.
we argue, who can win in a fight, who's better than this, and da da da. And and it just got to the point where my roommate at the time just turned around because he was working on the computer. He just turned around. He's like, either shut up or do something about it. Like, you can't just sit here and complain, if you're not going to contribute to the solution. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I knew enough people in the comic book industry because I grew up in New York. So I had been to the Marvel offices, I had been to the DC offices, and a bunch of different um, publishers as well. And I knew a bunch of people who worked in the comic book industry. And so I was kind of like, from going to different conventions. So I was like, okay, yeah, I can probably do this.
Mhm.
Little did I realize, no, I couldn't do it, but that didn't stop me. I like running uphill apparently. And so yeah, so we found a whole bunch of different creators. I built the company Committed Comics on the idea of giving people a platform and the ability to break into the comic industry.
Yeah.
In the early, I'd probably say the mid '70s and early '80s, it was a lot easier, easier in air quotes, of course, to break into comic books because they were actively looking for talent.
Mhm.
They were, if you had a good story and you mailed it into Marvel, they would buy it from you, and then, it would sit in a drawer or it would be published, or something, but they were open-minded, right? They were willing to communicate with new creators. Right around the early 2000s, that kind of stopped. It was, after the Image Revolution of '94,
Mhm.
where a bunch of the most popular artists and writers left Marvel and other companies to form Image.
Mhm.
The companies got very skittish about hiring talent because they didn't want to put all their eggs into, creator baskets and have the creators walk away with those baskets, which is what happened with Image. And so they were very much not really looking for new talent, kind of keeping everything very close knit. um, and so I decided to start a company where people had a little more freedom. They were going to have a support network to help them be creative.
Mhm.
And so, um, me and Alex, we started this. We found a bunch of different creators. We put together a bunch of different projects. 70% of those projects never saw the light of day, but some of them did. And then we got distribution through Diamond Distribution at the time.
Mhm.
They were the largest distributor of comic books, which is very funny. Oh, how the mighty have fallen, because now they just, they filed for bankruptcy and got bought out by, another company, and the industry is in a very much a tizzy. But yeah, no, we were carried in Diamond. We created a bunch of different projects, and then so I was doing the art direction, the editor in chief, kind of, keeping the company rolling along. My business partner Alex, he was kind of more behind the scenes guy. He wasn't really part of the creative. He was more part of the logistics side of the
Mhm.
business. So that allowed me to just focus, on new talent and focus on, scripts and artists and samples, and which that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to know about the incorporation or where taxes were going or all this, making sure we had the table paid for the next month. Who cares?
Mm-hmm.
I want the fun stuff. Um, and so, we did that for quite a while, and just, now it's 25, 26 years later and we're still plugging away. Um, but I decided to come onto the creative side of things, or more so the creative side of things, when we had a project that we were putting together, and unfortunately, the creator opted not to go forward. Um, with us publishing the project, he decided to go on his own, which, again, creator-owned projects, they're allowed to do that. It's a little disappointing when that happens, right? Because you put a bunch of time and effort into it, and then
Yeah.
it doesn't come to fruition. And so Alex suggested, he goes, "Hey, why don't you write a comic that you've been wanting to create for a while?
Mhm.
So that way, if we ever have a situation like this, we have a project to kind of still promote and push forward." Um, and so I was like, oh, okay, so I'll be the filler. Gotcha. Okay, there, that's fun. Um, but no, and then so I did already have a bunch of different stories. I was already being somewhat of a creative consultant, like I said, the art director for the company. So I was already kind of guiding storylines for some of the one shots that we did, and some of the graphic novels. And then I was just kind of like, let me see how this is. And the first issue took a while. This all happened in the middle of COVID, and so I had, in theory, time to work on it, but not really in theory.
Mhm.
Um, and so I put that together. We got the first issue published. We released it in summer of 23, and I just finished a second issue. Like, this is how long the process has taken me, for a multitude of reasons we'll get into, but it took me forever to get the second issue done. I just got it off to my interior series artist, and he's gung ho. He's like, "Yeah, let's do this, and then we'll meet at San Diego Comic Con to talk about it." And um, so yeah, so I mean, it's a lot harder than it looks. I mean, I knew that already, but
Yeah.
when you're actually doing it, it's like, oh, this is why everyone thinks this is hard. Now I get it, because it's hard.
Hmm. So
So
when you accept like submissions of comics from new creators, what do you have
mm,
in mind that like is like the checklist? Like, oh, if they meet all these standards, then I'll accept this submission.
it's not really. It's kind of a floating checklist, which is kind of odd. I really have like two main things. It's like, be
Okay.
good and don't suck.
Yeah,
Like,
but
those
that's
are my
so big.
two. I know it is. And the reason why I have it like that
Mhm.
is because what I'm really looking for is, I'm looking for dedicated people who are creative, right? So
Mhm.
even if you have, let's say you want to do a 4-issue miniseries, and you have the script done for all 4 issues, but you only have your pencilist or your artist has only started working on the first issue. Well,
Mhm.
I'm not going to turn the person away and say, this isn't, come back when you're completed, because that could be a year, that could be 3 months, that could be, like, took me two years to write my second issue, right? So,
Yeah.
I don't want to be on the hook for that long, but at the same time, I don't want to push people away. I also know why it took me that long, is because I didn't have somebody poking and prodding me, and an editor. I was the editor. I'm also the art director, right? So I had all
Yeah.
these different things going through my head as I'm sitting here trying to write the story. If I had somebody else kind of poking me every once in a while, going like, "Hey, have you thought about this?" or "What about this?" Maybe, well, not maybe, 100%, it would have come to fruition a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, I also have people who come to me and they go, "Hey, we've got this entirely completed miniseries, 3 issues. It's all penciled, written. We're just working on the letters right now. Are you interested?"
Mhm.
Yeah, like, so there's not really, criteria in the hard sense, of this is what I'm looking for. I am looking for something that I can market, though. So that is one of those things that if I'm going to get behind a project for somebody, and I'm going to be going out to conventions, or going to talk to retailers, or going to talk to,
Mhm.
guest cover artists, I have to make sure this is a project that I look at and go, this is good. This is something I, as a collector, would buy and read, because I also am a giant collector of comic books.
Yeah.
And so if I look at a project and I go, I don't think I would put this in my collection, I'm probably not going to be publishing it. Now, that's not to say that all the projects are just my cherry picked children, right? But it's along those lines to where I still have to have some understanding of the project in order to promote it. So one of the things that Committee Comics does not have is any kind of
Hmm.
manga style books, and it's mostly because of the fact that I am not. Well, it's not that I'm not a fan of manga, but I don't understand people's level of interest and why they're interested in it.
Okay.
Like I've talked to fans of manga and they go, "Oh, well, it's the stories and it's the character things." And when I've looked at them, some of the mangas, or some of the animes and that kind of stuff, I look at them, I go like, well, yeah, they're interesting characters, but like I personally wouldn't want to follow this character for 10 issues.
Hmm.
Like I don't see why someone's following One Piece, right? Like why they're looking at Luffy going like, oh my god, this is like a great series. I need to get the next 25 issues. So since I don't fully get that interest, it's going to be very hard for me to take a manga project and go to a manga fan and go, hey, you need to have this, and they're going to go, why? And I'm going to go,
I don't
I
know.
don't know, you know. And again, I mean, I've had some amazing manga stuff come across my desk. Actually, there was some guy who submitted to me years ago, I believe at San Diego Comic Con, a manga style thing about a lawyer or whatever, and that was the courtroom drama,
Daredevil?
manga. Yeah, but he didn't have any superhero powers or something like that, and it was like this very weird thing. And I kind of looked at it and go, like, I don't get it, I don't understand it. He then sent me copies like almost a decade later. It's super successful.
Oh, wow.
Like another company went and published it, and I think it has like some like a video game or an animated short or
Wait,
something
what's it
like.
called?
I don't even remember. I have it. The guy sent me something, sent me a copy of it somewhere, and I have it. But it was one of those kind of things. I looked at it and I was like,
Ace Attorney?
this, yeah, that might have been it. I'm not 100% sure. That might be it. I might be, conflating a
Hmm.
couple different things, but essentially what it was is that somebody who knew what that project was took it and published it,
Yeah.
right? Like I I looked at it and I was like, I don't know if I would be able to market this. I don't know if I'd be able to sell this to people, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and kudos to him, right? He went and found a great publisher who got behind him, and he's super successful. I've also had a somebody who came to me years ago and had a bunch of different projects, and I kind of just didn't have room in our schedule at the time. But they were decent projects. But I was like, you know what? There's something off about some of them, and so I kind of told him, the portfolio review, and he went and did them on Kickstarter and was super successful. And it was very funny because he came to our table at San Diego years later and was
Hmm.
like, "Hey, if you guys hadn't turned me down, I wouldn't have funded everything myself and made a ton of money on it." And I'm like, "Kudos," like so. So yeah, so I mean, I definitely look at really good things, but if I can't figure a way to kind of sell it and market it, and it's not the right timing as well, the time frame, I have to pass on projects. And sometimes that, like, I look at it and I go, like, oh, I know I'm gonna bite myself in the butt later on this one.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I if I can't devote 200% behind a project, I don't want to take it, right? Because I don't think that's fair to the creator. I don't
Yeah.
think that's fair to the industry. I don't think that's fair to me, right? Like, if I'm gonna kind of like only have part of my attention promoting the comic book, and I've got other stuff going over here, like I don't think that does anybody any good.
Hmm.
I think you really have to be drilled down, which is one of the reasons why, we've been, Community Comics has been in business for such a long time, but we have a very small group of series. And it's mostly just because of the fact that it's like, I would much rather release one or two books a year and really push those books and get them
Yeah.
out there as high quality and the best art possible and that kind of stuff instead of doing 10 books in a year. you
Yeah.
know um I mean, I had the opportunity, somebody who just, comic book legend who just passed away recently, which was Jim Shooter.
Hmm.
I had the opportunity to sit down with him very early on in the infancy of Committed Comics, and talk to him. And he's the person who started Valiant. He started Defiant Comics. He did
Oh.
Broadway comics with Lauren Michaels, who does Saturday Night Live. Like that was their publishing arm of Broadway
Mhm.
video. Um, and I talked to him, and I got a lot of great advice. But one of the things he said, which stuck with me, he goes, publish books with your own money on your time. you know, he said that yeah, people are going to want a monthly book, or they're going to want this out this time frame. And he goes, if you're not comfortable with that, you're going to rush and you're going to make a mistake. And he's not sitting there saying never get anything off the ground, right? Because I
Yeah.
also know some creators who they overthink things, right? And they never let it go, right? They never keep tinkering with it. Oh, I can make it better, I can make it better. But no, he wasn't saying that in terms of on my own time, but more along the lines of just if when you'll know, he said, you'll know as an editor when it's ready to go. And so I've kind of done that. And so we do about 2 to 3 books a year at this point.
Okay.
um and that's I mean, I also have a full-time job, and I do some other stuff on the side. And so
Oh, that's so
you know
crazy.
so for me, I'm like, yeah, okay, 2 books, yeah, I'm good.
So do you use a lot of your money from your full-time job to promote the books for this? Yeah.
Yeah, for one of our projects, Nira-X, she's a character that's been around for over 33 years. I think her anniversary is coming up.
Damn.
Yeah. So Bill Mouse was doing the project years ago. He was self-publishing, and then he went to another publisher, and
Mm,
then he retired her from publishing for a while because he needed to pay bills, right? And so he would take
yeah.
on paid jobs. One year, God, I think it's almost 8 years ago now. We've been working together. um, I was sitting next to him in San Diego and in Artist Alley, and he was sitting there just doing fan art and doing commissions for people, and he had a couple of Nira-X things on the table, but not nothing new. And I said, "So have you ever thought about bringing her back in print?" And he's like, "I'd love to." He goes, "But there's so much logistics, there's so much time, there's." And I was like, "Well, what if somebody took like care of all that stuff and just told you create the project?" Yeah, exactly. I'm literally like, if only you knew a publisher you know, who specialize in independent comic books, creator owned.
Oh, me.
Uh, yeah, and that was, I think, like I said, I think over 8 years ago, and we did an omnibus, a 300 plus page omnibus. We did
Mm.
2 preview books. We did 2 full 3 issue miniseries now, and we do all those pretty much on Kickstarter. And so, I'm only out of pocket a little bit here and there, but majority of the print run is being paid by the Kickstarter fans. Um, and that allows me to also then take some of my additional resources and put towards other books, because Nira-X is kind of paying for itself perpetually, right? It's
Yeah.
we make XYZ dollars and we roll that right back into the next print run to roll it right back out. Um so yeah, I mean, it's we're mostly self-funded. We have 1 or 2 small investors here and there that kick in money, and then we pay them back and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, it's just pretty much me and my business partner Alex. We're just dumb like that.
How do you stay so passionate about this business for like so long?
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I am just a fan of the art of comic books. Like, I have a ton of books on the history. I have, old catalogs that go back into the 80s and the 90s. And I was just in my storage unit the other day, reboxing some things, and
Mm.
I have like 33 different diamond previews, from like 2004 till now. A lot of them
God.
I kept because Committee Comics was inside of them. So like in
Yeah.
2004, Committee Comics had listings in there. So I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to keep these ones for my archives. And but it's like I also just like to know the history of stuff, and so I have a bunch of comic books or a bunch of reference books about the history. And I don't know, it's the only true American art form,
Hmm.
um as it stands, without any kind of modification to it. People sit and be like, oh, well, jazz. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's music, and that is an art form. Don't get me wrong, but comic books is the only really true American style. I mean, even if you go back to like the 1800s, I mean, comic books, they had cartoons, comic strips,
Mhm.
in England, and they have single panels, but putting them in a book was a uniquely, an American concept. Um, so so I don't know. I think that's why it's just something that I really love. And then, you know, when I was little growing up, I mean, it was portable entertainment. That's what, when you're as old as I am and you're growing up in the dark ages before tablets and phones and internet, I mean, I think people of my age and older, we have a strong connection because that was our only form of entertainment, right? You had that, movies, and maybe some TV. Like, until you got to about the mid to late 80s, TV kind of sucked. You know, it wasn't really that great. I mean, it was, you had Saturday morning cartoons, and for kids,
Mhm.
that was pretty much it. You know, I still remember my mom every, I think it was Sunday night, she'd watch Masterpiece Theater on PBS, and that was like the
Mhm.
most dullest, driest, boring, you know, things ever to watch. It's just, there was so many procedural cop shows and stuff that weren't really good. And people will go back and you get them on VHS now or DVD, or you download it, right? And like Netflix has a whole bunch of those
Mhm.
series,
Mhm.
and people watch them, they go, "These are terrible. Why are we watching this?" It's like, yeah, I know. So, you know,
So since you're so, picky choosing your comics to
Mhm.
get submissions, do you find that you see a pattern with the comics you decide to publish?
I don't think there's a real pattern, mostly because of the fact that I lean more into the, I'm looking for passionate creators more so than a genre type, you know.
Okay.
Early on, two of our early series did have they did have a thin connective tissue between them. It was our series Java and Neodawn, and
Mhm.
the connective tissue between the two was they were both taking place in a post-apocalyptic world. Java was a post-apocalyptic world that had a little bit more humor,
Mhm.
little bit of absurdity to it, whereas Neodawn was a much darker series, and so it was
Yeah.
kind of almost like two sides of the same post-apocalyptic coin, you know. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, when people look at our catalog, and I don't know if this is a detriment to Committee Comics or a strength, but like
Yeah.
we have, a ghost story book, we have a road trip, ghost story book, we have a superhero style, we have an action and adventure, we have, you know, um, kind of almost like educational. One of our series, which is unfortunately out of print at this point, called Miss Miniver.
Mhm.
It was our sales girl and cosplayer who we used to travel with, and she wrote a book about, her adventures, right? And they were obviously very fabricated, because there was
Yeah.
mystical elements to them. But yeah, but I mean, it was her, and and at the end of each issue, she would write a little bit about like, what did you learn, kind of deal, and how to, like, in one of the in issue one, it was like, how do you plan your perfect convention, right? Like, you look at the guide, you look at the floor map, and you know where everybody is, and you do all that, and then like there was another one, how to start a cosplay page, because she was a cosplayer, and
Mhm.
so she kind of gave information on that. So like our books have kind of been all over the map in that sense. And I think that, to me, that's great because it allows people to come back to the table every year at different shows that we repeat at and we revisit, and we have something new on the table that I can confidently look at the person and be like, hey, if you enjoyed this project that you bought from us last year, you're going to enjoy this project,
Mhm.
because it has the same level of passion, the same level of creative energy, the same level of interesting bits to it. So I think we've done a pretty good job of not falling into a connective, pattern. But again, I'm also, very deep on the inside. So maybe somebody else will look at us and go, what are you talking about? The pattern's right there,
Yeah. But that's
I don't
interesting.
know.
'Cause I feel like a lot of people, well, at least like the other writers I talk to, they always say, "Yeah, every single thing I write is science fiction," or like every single thing I write is for kids, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of times creators will, and I hate to use this term, like fall into a trap,
Mhm.
because it's what's successful, it's what works for them. You know, um,
You know, like
and
typecasting,
again,
type comicking, sorry.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, with actors, right? They got typecast
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. And so I think creators, they know what they can do and what they can sell. And that's also the other kicker is this is that, obviously there's a financial end to it all, right? And so we want to make sure that we're not just putting thousands of dollars out into printing something that nobody wants to buy, right? So
Yeah.
if you're able to write a children's story and you're able to sell that to people, well then your initial fan base is going to be children's books readers, right? So the next thing you're going to do, you're going to want to play to that fan base.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think as a publishing company, not as an individual creator, I think I have a little bit more freedom with that to where I don't have to worry about that, right? Because, like I said, as long as I can look at a project and go, oh, I'm passionate about this, or I believe in this project, I'll always be able to sell it,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so my customer base is, do you like good stories? Do you like cool artwork? Like, that's my whole customer base. And I'm sure there are other creators that do shift around a little bit, and that, but I think you're right. I think, it becomes a little bit of a crutch for them. And then the other thing which I have noticed is that like certain things like, and I can't remember where I heard this. I was listening to another podcast or interview with somebody, and they said post-apocalyptic stories are the easiest stories to write because, and there's a reason for that. And he
What?
and he said, yes, and he said it's because you're writing your story in a world that doesn't have any more rules, right? Like you as the creator can dictate what rules are still in play, right?
Hmm.
So like Robert Kirkman, who did Walking Dead, who's exceptionally talented writer and that kind of stuff, you know, he decided, okay, we're going to not deal with the politeness of humanity, but there's still going to be a large chunk of people who don't want to just kill people, right?
Yeah.
So there's still some law and order in a broken world, and that's what the main characters of Walking Dead are trying to establish, right? They're the
Yeah.
law and order. Whereas in other, post-apocalyptic worlds like Mad Max, right? There is no law and order. Like
Hmm.
even your main character, even your protagonist is breaking all the rules just to survive, right?
Yeah.
So that's a totally different, but they're both post-apocalyptic, you know?
Hmm.
And then you have stories where it's, like not quite post-apocalyptic, but as in the similar vein, like Fifth Element, right? Whereas, you have Bruce Willis's character, who has to, save this person who's going to save the world kind of deal. Like that's another trope, so to speak, for post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I think that's what he meant. And not that, like finding an original concept is easy, because that is very difficult. But because of the fact that most of the structural bonds that you would have to abide by
Hmm.
are gone in post-apocalyptic, right? If you were going to write a story about 1950s England, there's certain parameters, right? Like you can't have someone in the 1950s sit there and turn around and be like, all right, I'm going to go now and fly away, right? Like that doesn't work.
Hmm. Hmm.
um you know uh so it's things like that, I think, that become a little bit more, you know confusing or easy, so to speak. So
You know, speaking of Robert Kirkman, he kind of got famous in a way like, I gotta finish everything and I gotta make a bunch of stuff and one of them is gonna hit. How do you feel about, because you do kind of the complete opposite, where you're like, I'm only gonna write something I love or focus on something I genuinely find interesting. How do you feel about his like battle pope, and like those kind of
Oh,
stuff?
well, I love Battle Pop. I think it's silly. I mean, the thing is that with Kirkman and a lot of other creators, what people forget is that he did this over a series of 10 years, 15 years, right? Like
Yeah.
people discover this stuff right behind the other, right? They'll discover Walking Dead, and then they'll discover Battle Pope, and then they'll discover, something else that he wrote in the span of 7 months,
Hmm.
you know? If you look at the copyright dates on those, one of them was 1992 and one of them was 1996 and one of them was 2014. And, so it's like you're looking at someone's extended career in a much more dense packing. So I don't think it's quite as much as, hey, let's just throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. I think it's a little bit more strategic about that. And I'm sure if you were to, ask Kirkman, I'm sure there was a reason why certain stories came up at certain times, right? Like I'm sure there was stuff going on in his life, where he thought, giant buff Pope riding on a dinosaur was
Yeah.
going to work, you know? um, I mean, there's a very famous story or, infamous story of, Kevin Smith of why he made the movie Tusk because he was on his podcast and they're all getting high and smoking weed and they came up with this ridiculous concept of a story of a guy, you know,
Mhm.
making a walrus suit and making someone live inside that walrus suit and they're all laughing and that 2 years later became the movie um because they were all high and talking and just joking around about silly things, and
Mhm.
so but I think when people find people's careers in a very truncated way that can be great and give you the wrong perception at the same time, you know um I've heard a lot of people look at artists and go like, oh, he was so much better on this series when he was doing this, and I'm like, yeah, that was 22 years ago. Like he evolved us, he changed as an artist. Like he can't keep drawing the same way that you found his stuff because then he's not growing as an artist for himself.
Yeah.
And I think artistic growth is really important. I mean, one of my favorite, actually, probably my favorite creator of all time is
Mhm.
Jack Kirby. And when you look at Jack Kirby's stuff from the early 40s to then his run in the Fantastic Four and Thor in the 60s, and then you look at his stuff with, some of the Image books, Phantom Force that he did in the 2000s, I'm sorry, the 90s, and the stuff that was printed after he passed away in the early 2000s, like his art style had such a wide range of stuff, but you literally go from, the 40s to the 60s. I mean, that's 20 something years. Like, you know, as a creator, you're going to do more things. You're going to do different things. And so I think, but one of the connecting things through Kirby's stuff was all of his panels and all of his characters had an action embedded into them. Like you would open up a book,
Mhm.
of the Fantastic Four or the X-Men or Miracle Man, um, and is or Mr. Miracle, and you're just there's so much energy in those panels, and people constantly bring up there's a whole fight in one of the Captain America comic books that they used in, I want to say, Winter Soldier. It was the sequence when Cap fights Batroc on the Shield freighter. When,
Yeah.
like, in the very beginning, they're in stealth mode, and he goes down and he takes out everybody on the perimeter of the thing, and Scarlet Witch lands. And I mean, a Black Widow lands, and she's like chewing gum, and she's like, "What about
Yeah.
that girl in accounting?" um, that whole fight sequence was like, and they deliberately said it was done based off of this fight sequence that Kirby did with Batroc and Captain America from his, I think, mid 70s run of Cap, and it's like that fight sequence was so good, and then you go back and you look at the comic book, which is like 2 pages, and that's it,
I
and it
know.
has just the same amount of power and energy into it. And you're like, holy crap, that was awesome, Um, so yeah, so I mean, like that to me was his art style completely evolved, but that was always one thing that was very consistent. Like George Perez, his art style evolved and changed over time. But one of the things with Perez is like, he could draw 500 people in a room, which he often did because he was crazy like that. But every person looked different, right? Whereas a lot of people would draw a big crowd scene, either mute out half the faces and put them in shadows, or it would kind of look like the same person over and over again. And nope, same thing with Keith Giffen. Keith Giffen on his um, what was it, League of Superheroes. You know, go back and look at his stuff, his Legion of Superhero stuff, and you look in the backgrounds, and he was drawing crowd scenes and drawing almost every other person's face, and you're just like, the hell's wrong with you guys?
Oh my
But
God.
that was also why we loved their art, right? Because we could look at it and go like, oh, this is like, I'm getting lost in this. Bernie Wrightson was the same way. It's like you look at his stuff and like they did. IDW was doing those artifacts. I think I can't remember if they're artifact editions or artisan editions because they have both. So like
Mhm.
one of them is like a smaller version, and one of them is like the 11x17 art styles. And like you look at some of those ones that they did in the black and white artwork, it just like, I own all these comic books that I'm looking at for like the Jim Steranko one they did, and and the Bernie Wrightson one, and I'm still looking at the pencil pages of the black and white pages and just getting lost in them because there's so much stuff in there,
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, but at the same time, their styles evolve, right? If you take someone's 20, 30-year career, hopefully they're not going to be drawing the same because if
Well,
they are, it's kind of boring.
yeah. I mean, it means that you haven't like improved. And like, I mean, I look back at my old stuff and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I thought this was
Mhm.
good. Right.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if an artist doesn't do that, one, they're lying. I think that's number one, and number two, I think they're in denial, right? Like, and not saying that you can't look at some older stuff and be like, wow, that was really good. Like, I like how I did that hand, or I like that perspective that I used. But to
Hmm.
to to look at older stuff and not see growth, I think is bad. You know, and then a lot of times, especially in the comic book world, like you look at stuff and you're like, wow, this looks so much different, and then you realize, oh, they have a different inker. Oh, this inker made it look this way.
Hmm.
And then you start to understand the layers of complexity that go into a traditional comic book panel or comic book page, um, which I think in modern comics that's lost a little bit because a lot of times they're either doing digital artwork or the same person is doing everything, pencils, writing it, penciling it, and inking it, and
Hmm.
maybe they send it out to a different colorist.
Yeah.
So I don't think you're getting the mashup of talent that you had in the comic books from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Um, I've talked to creators, modern creators, like that, and they're like, "Well, it's better now," and I'm like, "I don't know, is it?" Like, I guess you're seeing someone's singular vision, which I think is great, you know. Um, but I do think there is some benefit to having somebody also put in their creative touch to a project, where you
Hmm.
have more than one person's, I guess, voice is a way to say it. Um, but I don't know. I mean, again, the creative end that I'm on is not the visual side. It's the writing side. And would it be helpful to have somebody have a co-writer? Maybe. You know, maybe I could get ahead of the game a little. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's not an area that I've gone down yet, and I don't know if that is something I would want to. You know,
No, I agree
so.
with you though. I think having a lot of people working on something gives you like a lot of perspectives on a story and it kind
Mm.
of helps to like shape it as well as possible. And also, you gotta be humble when you work with other people because you're like, you messed that up. I'm like, see, if you didn't say anything, you would have been fine, I would have been kept going with this, but now you pointed it out, now I gotta fix it.
Right. And the funny thing is about that, it's like we've had to deal with that in our committee comics end as well. Like we did a print years ago with an artist and she handed in the pencils and it was gorgeous and it was beautiful and I sent it off to the inker and the inker emailed me and he goes, "Is she supposed to have seven toes?" And I was like, "Wait, what?"
Exactly.
And I looked again and it was more like the shadowing that they put it, like
Mm.
but the inker looked at it and been like, if I fill this in the way it's going to be filled in, is going to be
Seven.
seven toes on the right hand, the right foot. Like that's not going to be good. Um, and so he corrected it, right? Like he just, erased a little bit line, put another line in, and I think if we had that artist, the penciler, do the inks, she probably wouldn't have caught it, right? Because she in her brain she's looking at it going, that's correct.
Yes.
That's the way I drew it. So yeah, so definitely ways that where other creators can also help to fill that in. I think that's also one of the things that with a lot of self-published comic books they're missing is an editor. You know,
Yeah.
somebody who's going to question something, a layout, or push back a little bit. I mean, I always see people have editors in the credits of their books, and then I look at stuff and I kind of go, did you really have an editor on this, or did you have a co-signer, right? Who
Yeah.
kind of just looked at your stuff and said, yeah, 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 everything looks good, and they didn't really go into. I mean, the role of an editor is very multifaceted. It's not, always like, hey, we're gonna make sure that all of the words are spelled right. Like that's a copy editor, right? So that's the
Yeah.
specific to the text. And and then like the assistant editors, that when I was being told kind of what an assistant editor does is they just basically keep the lines of communication open between the whole creative teams, right? So they'll talk to their artist and talk to the writer and make sure that there's no miscommunication happening between the two of them, or they'll reach
Mhm.
out to the inker and go, "Hey, we're about to send you pages. Make sure you're ready for them." Um, and then I think the overall editor or the line editor is just either keeping track of things issue to issue, kind of like a script supervisor for a movie, which is important to make sure, like, okay, well, if the character breaks their arm in the panel 7, you're not going to have them without a cast in panel 9, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but also, I think a good editor should also be kind of looking at it and going like, is this the best way to tell the story? Um, and I don't know if there's enough editors, either current or previous or whatever, pushing back a little bit, and saying like, this needs to change, or this angle needs to change. Because I definitely know in independent comic books, I don't think a lot of that's going on because, again, it's a lot of people doing all of the work, and by the time the person who's acting as the editor might see it, I think it might be 60% done, right? And so you don't really want to tell somebody
Yeah.
go back and change this panel. Whereas I have 100% gotten a fully full completed page, and I've said, yeah, this is going to have to change, you know. And I try to get it beforehand. Like a lot of times when I'm working with a new creator, I'll tell them, hey, give me your thumbnail breakdowns before you pencil the pages,
Mhm.
because that way I can look at the breakdowns and I can extrapolate what it's going to look like, and I can say, nope, this angle's wrong. You got to change this perspective. You got person's walking in. You've had the viewpoint 360. You don't want that, to where like the person walks in on the right hand side, but the next panel they're walking to the left hand side. You know,
Yeah.
um, and some of that stuff you can now fix digitally as well, right? Obviously, if the panel person walking, you can literally just cut it and just flip it
No,
in
I like
Photoshop.
this horizontal flip. I'm like, no more problems
Yeah,
anymore. Like
yeah, no problems.
I did one thing. There's like a scene where my character drinks soup, and suddenly the spoon teleports to the
Mhm.
broken arm. I'm like, wait a second, she can't use her broken arm, so I
Nope.
had to flip like the entire page like
Yeah.
this. I had to rewrite all
Hmm.
the words, all the sound effects.
Oh yeah, you
And,
got to change it all. Yep.
but it was
Well, I
easy
mean,
because it was digital.
yeah, but I mean that's again, at the same time, some of those go into creative folklore. Like in Star Wars, there's a scene where they use an alternate cut, and in 1 second, Luke's got the cup in this hand, and the next second he's got the cup in this hand. And it was one of those kind of things to where it was the '70s, and they were doing guerrilla marketing and movie creating. So they missed that, but at the same time, people look at that now and be like, "Oh, that's the magical blue milk,"
Yeah.
you know. Um, so I mean, it's sometimes funny, but I mean, again, like you said, we want to make sure we're putting out the best stuff possible. So when you have a couple of different people,
Mhm.
it helps to drill that down and make sure that we are getting the best thing, the best amount of work possible, out of everybody.
So Thomas, I have one final question.
Hmm.
What's one advice you give to the aspiring comic creators watching this right now as a publisher and editor?
Um, the best advice I can give is be consistent. Too often I've gone to San Diego Comic Con. I go every year. It's going to be when we're recording this. It's going to be in 2 weeks. As I'm looking at my calendar, kind of panicking, but not panicking. I've got everything under control. I don't have anything under control. Um, but too often than not, I do portfolio reviews in San Diego every year. I dedicate anywhere between 8 to 14 hours throughout the week of looking at portfolios. And yeah, they do it in 4 hour blocks. So I'll either do like three different 4 hour blocks, or two. This year I'm doing three, but instead of I'm doing one 4 hour block and then two 3 hour blocks. So
Okay.
I'm doing 10 hours of portfolio reviews
Oh my God.
over 2 different days. I'm doing one on Thursday and then two on Saturday.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And again, I love it. This is one of the things I love to do is look at portfolios and talk to people. And, I just, thankfully in San Diego, I have time to do that, right? Like when I get stuff mailed to me, I don't always have time to look at it, and I really feel bad, but, so I try my best to do that. But I tell people be consistent, because there's been plenty of times where I've looked at a portfolio, taken the samples back, looked at it, kind of did a breakdown and say, this looks really good. And I contact the person and I never hear from them again. Or I contact the person, I go, yeah, let's move forward with this project that you pitched to me. And that, okay. And we go back and forth a couple times and then nothing,
Mhm.
you know. There are some, in some people's eyes, in some fans' eyes, some mediocre comic book creators who work for the big companies. And I always, but anytime someone sits there and complains, why is so and so getting more work? And it's like, well, because so and so turns the pages in on time.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Like I love Joe Madureira's stuff. Like when he was doing Battle Chasers, when he was doing X-Men, when he was doing Superman. Like I love his artwork. I love his art style. There was a point in time in the mid 2000s where he was not reliable. He his timing was off. He'd be late with books. He'd be late with pages. He'd be late with stuff. So like editors kind of had to like phase him off their projects because they're Marvel and DC, they're releasing monthly books, right? They need that stuff done on time every single time. Well, I mean, it's the same in the independent world, but just a little bit smaller, right? If I'm sitting you telling you, hey, I need 24 pages, I'd like to get this book printed by September, and we're in July, and if I stop hearing from you in mid-August, we're screwed, you know?
Yeah.
um, and so that's what I tell people, just be consistent and consistency also will translate to professionalism, right? Like, you want to be professional. I've had plenty of people come and sit down on portfolio reviews, or I've gotten letters, and they're very casual in the letters. And I don't mind casual elements, I mean, this is comic books. We're here to have fun. We're here to make fun stuff. And yeah, but when someone sits down for a portfolio review and, they say, hi, my name's Skidmark. And it's just like, no, that's not your name. Like, that could be your pen name. That's
Yeah.
fine. But when you go to a job interview, you don't walk into, Goldman Sachs and be like, yo, buddy, what's going on? Yeah, I'm not wearing pants, but it's okay. That's how I roll. It's like, no, you're probably not going to get the job. Um, and again, I don't want to sit here and stifle anybody's, creative personality or anything like that. But at the same time, it's like there's a fine line, and like I said, I think if you're being consistent and you're showing up to make sure that your creative output, matches your desire, I,
Mhm.
I, I think that's going to take the person a lot further than making sure that right foot is perfect in that panel. Um, it's just so, but yeah, I mean, it's crazy. There's like I was telling you, at SummerCon, there's no correct way to do anything in the comic book industry, right? And it's the most complex and asinine and broken system that works 100% of the time somehow. It's just like I don't know how, but it works because if you talk to 25 small press publishers or 25 editors, you're never going to get the same way they do
Mm.
the job of whatever the title is, which is great. And at the same time, just makes me want to kill people sometimes. Just saying.
Consistency is key, guys. Just make your stuff. Okay? At least you'll get it out into the world. That's what I tell myself
Yeah.
at least.
Well, yeah. I mean, the other thing is, like I've had people come to me and they're like, oh, well, I'm not going to finish this story if no one's going to publish it. And I'm like, well, then I don't want to work with you because I want to work with people who are like, hey, I have to get the story out of my head. Why? Because it's my head.
Yeah.
I need to get this artwork down on the pages. Why? Because it's in my head. Like, I want to work with people who are driven to do that have that same level of passion that I have,
Mhm.
because then I know that we're going to make the best product possible. Right. Like it sounds silly and might sound a little naive, but if you have person A who loves this item and person B who loves this item and person C who loves this item, the item can't be bad. That's kind of the way I look at it. Maybe it's a little naive, but if enough people love it, like there are creators or comic book series I look at and I go like, why are people buying that? And then I look at their sales number and go, I apparently know nothing, you know,
Yeah.
because because a ton of people like that creator, that product, like Labubu's perfect example.
Oh my God,
You
I was
know,
just thinking about that.
I, yeah, I look at Labubu's and I go, that's ugly. I have no idea what you spent how much on that, you know, and I'm clearly in the minority. There's a couple 100 billion people who are buying Labubu's every day and killing for them.
Hey, I'm
you
supposed to be a
know.
target audience, and I don't understand it. So, you know.
So, but yeah, but that's what I'm saying is you gotta love the comic business because it's 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 the only way to survive in it. It's the
Mhm.
only way.
So,
So
where can our awesome listeners find your work, Thomas?
so they can go to committedcomics.com, and that's COMMITTED, that is our online store website. It's pretty much got as most current as possible stuff. I am updating it myself, so there are times where it will lag. And that's one of the things I need to do this week is update it for San Diego.
Mm.
Uh, because I will sure be having people go, "Hey, isn't this last year's exclusives? Why do you still have them up on the website as this year's exclusives?" And it's okay, I'll change it. Leave me alone. And then on Instagram, which is pretty much the main social media that we use, it's committed dot comics. So instead of it just being one word, there's a period in between committed and comics.
And
And that's
click
pretty much about it. Yeah.
click here, guys. Come on. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us and sharing your incredible insights.
No problem. I had a lot of fun. That's what this is all about.
Yes, I love yapping. That's what it's called, Podcast for Fun. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with fellow storytelling enthusiasts, comics enthusiasts specifically for this one. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.